Oh, that voice. Um, Karen Chapple, Dr. Karen Chapple, is director of the School of Cities and a professor of geography and planning at the University of Toronto. She is also professor emerita of the Department of City and Regional Planning at the University of California, Berkeley, where she held the Carmel Friesen Chair in Urban Studies and served as department chair. She studies inequalities in the planning, development, and governance of regions in the US and Latin America with a focus on economic development and housing. And I have been really just over the moon about finding all the stuff that Professor Chappell's been actually working on for the last like 25 years, mostly at Berkeley and now in Toronto. And but the latest thing she's working on is downtown recovery. And so I'll turn it over and let her go.
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation, Dennis. And yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about ADUs too, and I'll talk about gentrification and displacement related to transit. But let's talk about downtowns today, because actually that's probably the most pressing issue that we face right now from an economic standpoint. So we have been doing this work comparing downtown recoveries across North America. We have several articles and websites out. I'll show you all that in this talk and talk a little bit about what we found and what we think is causing some downtowns to come back faster than others, and then also talk about what we probably should do about it. So downtowns have been hit by disaster after disaster. And what's interesting, if you look at the history of the older downtowns in North America, you find that they always come back. So whether it's New York fire, Chicago fire, the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, they come back. And one of the reasons they come back is that they're built in a really resilient way. And many of our older downtowns and office districts are supported by transit lines, and often redundant transit lines. So New York City is notable for having multiple transit lines, all leading to downtown, as well as other ways of getting around. And of course, these transit lines actually supported the original development of the downtown office district, and supported the tremendous density of people, workers, visitors, and even residents, and made it all possible. And there's a question, of course, whether downtowns survived the 1956 Interstate Highway Act, and some did and some did not. So many downtowns saw highways driven right through the middle or right next to the heart of downtown, and that helped improve access to downtown, but often cut off the residential neighborhoods that were right next to downtown, and killed them off, and which actually led to fewer people being downtown. Now, New York, which is on the left here of the slide, New York saw the wisdom really early on and tore down the West Side Highway and built Battery Park City, and really made it resilient for disaster after disaster, from Sandy to the to 911 to the pandemic. New York has come back because it has lots of people living right next to all those office buildings. On the right is Toronto, where I live now, which has never learned and still has a highway right next to the waterfront, and a number of cities are kind of still suffering from this highway cutting off the downtown from other key amenities like the waterfront. Now, Europe was much smarter than us. Of course, it didn't build its highways right through the historic and cultural center of the region, but rather built peripheral highways. And I'll talk a little bit later about Europe and why it's been so resilient in the work we've been doing. So downtown was hit hard by COVID. This is early in the pandemic in 2020. This is downtown Toronto, and you will recognize this because this is what every downtown looked like in North America in March 2020. So we wanted to study it, and we have access to fabulous data, mobile phone location data, user-generated data on where they are. It's collected from folks that sign into location services, and we have 18 million devices that we track across North America. And what we're tracking is when they stop, is basically when they stop for a period of minutes, we can see where they are, and we can then use it to track activity levels over time. And so it's these are not traffic stops. We exclude cars going through. These are people coming to downtown, and whether they're going shopping at Macy's, or whether they're going to the office, or whether they're walking the dog, or going to a community center. We pick up all of this activity, and what's really interesting then is then you can look at activity now and compare it to before the pandemic. So that's what we've been doing with this data. This is what it kind of looks like in a particular moment, in a particular day. These are the stops that you might see, located at various different, retail, office, commercial, community facility, park, and so forth, uses all through the downtown area. Now, we can look at this in a 3D way, and I like to use these pictures to really show the variation in activity throughout the pandemic. So this is before the pandemic. This happens to be Toronto downtown in the red. This is the right after the pandemic hit, the period of time after the pandemic, and this is as we were starting to recover. So going back again, this is pre-pandemic, this is pandemic hits, activity goes way down. But notice something which is all around downtown, that neighborhood activity, especially as we're coming back, we see a lot of that neighborhood activity in the yellow. So what's really gone on is a redistribution from downtown to the neighborhoods, to employment subcenters, to neighborhood commercial corridors, and maybe not a net loss of activity. So so this is how we measure downtown. What we use an algorithm that looks at job densities, and then we draw a polygon around where the job densities are. This is downtown San Francisco. Every dot represents 100 jobs. And so for our downtown San Francisco definition, we capture a lot of the area around Market Street, Chinatown, a bit of south of Market, and that's what we're calling the heart of downtown. There are many different ways of defining downtown. We just decided to go with a job density definition. And then what we use in our analysis is recovery rate. So this is just looking at the number of cell phone pings today compared to the same season before the pandemic. So that's the rate, and so that's how we measure how far back, how much of a comeback each city has. So you can see our results on our website, downtownrecovery.com. I bought this site 2 years ago for $3. And it's now worth $2,000 because we get a lot of traffic. We get tens of thousands of hits on this site, and we get Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, Financial Times, San Francisco Chronicle, the Mercury News. That all of them are using this site now to track downtown recovery, which is fabulous. But it was a $3 investment, and then me and my students at Berkeley that got it all going. So but so on this site, we rank downtowns to see how much the comeback is. Now our last measurement ended in summer, and we found that the median recovery rate was about 74%. So in other words, about 3/4 of the activity from before the pandemic has come back. So that's actually pretty good. It's a lot better than it was a year ago. So and we're seeing high variation, and what we do is color code by region. So you can see here the Pacific region is in green, so San Francisco, Seattle, San Jose, Bakersfield, etc. Those are all in green, and you can see some cities are doing much better than others. San Jose called me up right away when they saw these rankings and said, "Hey, we're doing great. Why is it?" Well, it turns out San Jose, our definition of downtown includes San Jose State. So there's a lot of activity there, and some of these downtowns are really benefiting from student activity or other essential worker activity, different types of uses that are downtown that are keeping those activity levels up. Right now, the worst faring cities in our analysis are in the Midwest. So that's the light blue in there at the bottom. And these are generally cities with long-term structural issues that have just not come back from the pandemic. So, and this kind of zooms in so you can see a little bit better where the successful cities are. A lot of them are in the Southwest, in the Sun Belt. And in fact, in our models, we find that the temperature matters, that people are coming back where it's warmer, but I'll show you the models in a second. And these are the bottom dwellers in our ranking. I said I'd come back to Europe. So here's a comparison with European cities. And what should be notable here to you is that these cities are doing much better than anything in the US. Now, this is from earlier in the year, winter season of 2023. And at that point, we had San Francisco at about 32%. But the European cities are at 150, 200%. And why is that? It's really because of how they define their downtown, because their downtown is their historic and cultural center, and because they've been benefiting from a huge amount of tourism since the pandemic, pent-up tourism, and they're still benefiting from that. But there's a lesson there for the West Coast cities. I think that lesson is that we really ought to be thinking more about tourism, more about visitors, more about different ways to bring people back to downtowns than the commercial office district, which seems to be basically obsolete in its traditional form, at least. We are able right now to do recovery rates building by building, block by block. This is a pilot we did for the city of Toronto, and we're red are the buildings where the activity is not back, blue is where it is back, and this is the sort of analysis I think we will have to do in order to figure out what are the buildings we need to convert, and where do we want to kind of double down and have office activity. So we did a model to kind of figure out what mattered in terms of the downtown recovery, and we threw all kinds of variables in: demographic, economic, physical environment, regulatory environment, etc. And let me just show you some of the correlations here so you can get a feeling for what does matter. So the worst variable in terms of downtowns, the variable that is dragging you down more than any other is if you have a high share of professional jobs. So these are the lawyers and the accounting firms and management consultants and the advertising firms that don't really need to be together to be productive, that have really gone to remote work, that are working 3 to 5 days at home. If you were really concentrated in these types of jobs, you're not doing very well right now as a downtown. Same thing with finance and insurance, not as strong a negative correlation, but still, these are, again, the types of firms where the workers are doing quite a bit of work from home. On the bright side, if you were concentrated in hotels and food services, you tend to be doing better. You tend to be coming back quicker. So that's why people are coming downtown, is for these types of uses. If you have higher densities downtown, you don't do as well. There's been a bit of a flight from denser places. We don't know if this is temporary or permanent, so that's what we're going to be watching very carefully in the coming years. If you have a high share of car commutes, you tend to be doing better. So, and probably the cities that are giving free parking too are having a better time getting their employees back. So people in the beginning of the pandemic got into their cars, they deserted transit, and they don't necessarily want to go back on transit. So so those downtowns where they do accommodate the car commuters, they tend to be doing well. Again, that's not necessarily a long-term trend. It's just what we see in our data for now. We don't know whether that's going to hold, because transit systems are really fighting to come back. What we do believe is true, though, is that commute times matter a lot. Nobody wants to put up with the 45-minute or 2-hour commute anymore. So the longer the commute times, the less likely your downtown is to recover. In other words, those folks that can get into downtown really easily, they have a 10-minute walk or a 20-minute drive, or a 15-minute bus ride, they're coming back to work downtown. But the mega commuters are not. This is our random forest regression model on what matters most. And just to zoom in a little bit, and to give you the punchline, it's the economy, stupid. So it's just it's just the kind of luck of what sectors you had in your downtown area that is determining whether you come back or not. And so if you were overly concentrated in professional jobs or tech jobs, you're not doing as well. If you were more reliant on sectors with essential workers, talking construction, talking logistics, talking healthcare, talking education, if you were super lucky and had a university downtown, you're doing much better. And then there's some other factors that matter as well. Again, warm weather, lower crime rate matters a little bit, not much as all the other factors, but it matters a little bit. And then there's this issue of the transit. And just to kind of put a punctuation on the transit point, this is from our colleagues at Brookings that have looked at transit in detail and what's going on there. And we really are seeing a shifting ridership. We're seeing that people are no longer riding transit during peak hours, but they are riding off peak and weekend. And they are riding bus services. So it's not the end of transit, but we have to really kind of rethink our transit systems to accommodate the new kind of demand that we're seeing. And this is just a few correlations with transit. What's interesting with transit is that the recovery varies based on the type of transit system. So overall, if your downtown is coming back, it's correlated with transit recovery. So they kind of go hand in hand, but it's very different for different transit types. So buses, yes, buses are really important to recovery, and we've seen a surge in bus ridership. Light rail, not so much. So light rail lines are not doing well. They're the slowest mode to recover, and they are not bringing downtowns back. But commuter rail and subway ridership are really closely tied to downtowns, and so where one is doing well, the other is doing well. Just a note on transit-oriented neighborhoods generally. So we did a quick study of how transit-oriented type neighborhoods are doing. The neighborhoods that are around transit stations, those are the ones in red here. This is again a map of Toronto. But red, how they're doing compared to the controls, which are in green. And what we find is that you have 6% higher recovery in transit-oriented neighborhoods. So there is something to be said here. There seems to be a high demand for transit-oriented neighborhoods, and they're more walkable. Perhaps there's more amenities there. So you just have a much faster or a slightly faster recovery rate in these types of neighborhoods. So to wrap up, a few policy implications. Clearly, we need to diversify our downtowns. We need to have a variety of different land uses there. In particular, I think we need to make sure we have essential workers downtown, that we have a variety of different sectors that keep activity on the street 24/7, not just a 9 to 5 office district. So I think that needs to be the big focus. And then secondly, we need to simplify building conversions. Right now, it's just really, really hard to do. It's not going to be possible, of course, to convert everything to residential. Just a small share, maybe 10% can be converted to residential. But that's really hard to do now with all of our building regulations. And so we really need to simplify that. And then think about maybe other types of uses for buildings. How about student housing? Huge shortage of student housing everywhere across North America. And office buildings are pretty good candidates for that. So that's one use. And then we just need to think about other types of firms, nonprofits, incubators, other types of firms that will want to go downtown, where people do want to be together, and make sure our buildings work for those types. Obviously, point 3, we need to make our downtowns inclusive and affordable. That's going to be part of keeping activity there. The more affordable they are, the more likely we can get people on the street. And then thinking strategically about transit and walkability, and what are the modes that we need to invest in? What do we need to double down in? What is the future of transit? And certainly I was just at the Impact conference in Phoenix, and certainly people are thinking twice about bus now, thinking carefully about bus in a way that they weren't before. The conversation used to really only be about rail lines, but now kind of seeing where that's headed, it seems like bus much more expensive, much less expensive, and much more convenient and flexible than rail transit might be the way to go. So I'll wrap up there. And just with this quote, downtown is for people. Jane Jacobs wrote this in 1957, and it's 66 years later, and we haven't quite learned that yet.
Well, thank you, and for this lightning speed distillation of the work you've been doing in this. And what's so impressive to me too is your research and methodologies. And the more I look at it, I think the better it gets. I mean, just even the creativity of location data, and really just getting to unlocking the mysteries, I guess, when everyone has their hands up going, why are things like this? And you're being able to, based on your research and data, actually answer some of those questions.
Yeah, and this is just the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the dark ages, and we're gonna just think what it's going to be like in 10 years. Should be really extraordinary.
Yeah, but also and how this informs, as you mentioned, the decision making, say on transit, because funding transit is, as recently as the last session, is certainly something that's going to be talked about a lot in these parts for the next year.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, California has 700 transit stations planned across the state. So yeah. So how are we going to get users in them? So
yeah, and we've been talking about making transit seamless, and there's 28 different agencies, and they don't play well with each other.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. But also, though, and this gets back actually to Jane Jacobs, the patron saint of Build-A-Palooza.
Is that right? There she is, right?
She is actually, and I forgot to put up your we have you in the video. We'll have you with in this image, which is a Google Doodle from a few years ago, celebrating her 100th birthday.
Oh wow!
And but just the issue of cities and how a city, like San Francisco, that has, say, a financial district, and a professional office space, and it's similar to kind of like a monoculture in an Iowa cornfield.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of, and you mentioned even San Jose, the student housing of San Jose State, and its impact on, it's adjacent to downtown, but it's within your definition of downtown there.
Yeah.
And there isn't really an equivalent in, say, in San Francisco.
Or Oakland.
Or Oakland.
Yeah. Right.
And so those are, and you mentioned student housing is never, it's almost an oxymoron sometimes, hearing, like, for instance, the best example was trying to build new housing in Berkeley, and a new dormitory, and
right.
So there had to be specific legislation passed for, to kind of make them take a second shot at it.
Yeah, and even then, it's still
right. And
haven't been able to break ground yet, so hopefully.
No. Obviously everything takes so long, but as Bill McKibben was saying, the people that look like him, and he's 2 years younger than me, and he always talks about how old he is. So, but anyway, he was saying that the older white people are real good at stopping things.
Yeah.
And in this case, there was some, clarion examples of things you don't want to stop. One was the Berkeley student housing, and then the other, using CEQA.
Yeah.
And then the other was the Nordstrom.
Because students make too much noise.
Right. The Nordstrom, the Nordstrom's valet parking that won out over affordable housing. And I guess that was, I'm not sure, like around Nordstrom's. It was downtown. I don't know, it was Jesse Street or whatever, but it was a spot that really that was like the last straw. So we have seen a lot of movement legislatively, but then the thing with legislation is there's rulemaking, and application from local governments as well. So so I didn't go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, there's just there's huge amounts of contradiction, and people are not fond of density, and we found that in our results too, and it's a problem. And Jane Jacobs certainly loved it, but if you look at the polls, they tell us over and over again that people want single family homes on large lots, but they want them walkable and accessible and near transit, and it's a contradiction. You can't really do it all. But in California, we just haven't built enough of that walkable building type, so it's gotten more and more and more expensive, and we're terribly actually overbuilt in the large lot single family stuff. So we're sort of in this recovery mode that is going to take a long time.
Well, Dr. Chapple, you, speaking of doing it all, you're doing it, at the very least, you're doing it most. And I do look forward to looking back at your back catalog of investigations, and it seems, that's something that will, in the cool and rainy days ahead here, will keep me busy.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
And
happy to stop by.
I'm just so speaking of that back catalog, I do recommend everyone look up these things, because and I'll try to send stuff out about the ADU stuff,
ADUcalifornia.org, downtown recovery,
gentrification things,
urban displacement.org.
It's it's a kind of been there, done that kind of issue, but in terms of your investigations, but I think it's new for us, and we'll be better at looking into it. So thanks again.
Yeah, Thanks for having me.
We're going now to actually some positive news in terms of housing the homeless.